Hello, everyone. I'm Molly Kimsey, and I am going to present information that I obtained through adult learner interviews. This was a very rewarding um, assignment for me. I really enjoyed working with adult learners to learn more about how they learn and experiences that they have had. So, the participants for my interviews I interviewed four people, three females and one male. Mindy is a 38-year-old white female who was working toward a BS degree in elementary education, dual certified with elementary and special education. Mindy is currently a paraprofessional and has been a paraprofessional for several years. Um, she had an interesting story that she shared where she spoke about how when she was in the 11th grade, a junior in high school, she was tied for fourth place for valedictorian. And then she had a lot of life events happen. Her parents got divorced. She began to question her sexuality. She was anxious, developed anxiety and depression, and plummeted. She ended up graduating 14th in her class, which wasn't terrible, but it was a letdown, a difficult time for her. So I asked Mindy if she felt like that time period had any influence or impact on her future pursuits toward formal education. And she said that surprisingly that it did not. She felt that the way that her educational pursuits had played out was the way that they would have probably done even if she had been valedictorian, because she had such internal conflict. So she was accepting of that. So then Jim, a 62-year-old white male, who is a general contractor, and he is in construction. His entire family is in construction, and they have been for many generations. He inherited a really dilapidated 1968 Chevrolet pickup from a beloved uncle. And he really has this goal of restoring this truck. Well, while most people would take the truck to painters, upholsterers, mechanics, Jim is doing all this on his own, which is requiring him to learn many new skills. He's also having to learn more about various tools that are appropriate for use, products, and so on. So it's interesting that Jim, when I asked him about his positive or negative experience, he talked about how he'd always struggled with reading and probably was learning disabled in reading, but was never diagnosed just because during the time when he was in school, Jim said that it just was looked over because he really excelled in math. So he was just great at math, and so they just helped him sort of limp along, and he said he graduated, barely was able to graduate, but he did graduate and then moved directly into his family's business. So it was interesting to hear about his process of this truck restoration, and how he is scaffolding his understanding and how he's reaching out to restorers and mechanics and painters, and he's really learning and he's really educating himself on how to restore this truck. So it's very self-directed. So it's interesting person to talk with, as was Mindy. So Rachel is a 42-year-old African-American who is also working toward a BS degree in elementary special education. She's a full-time student, a mom, and a wife. So those are her roles, and that's what she is. That's how she identifies as an adult learner. So she had an interesting story as well when I asked her about a time where she was really good or really negative experience in formal educational setting. And she talked about, and it's around high school time, that her mother was away from the home a lot. because she worked and her father was at home, but he was addicted to drugs. So it was as if, Rachel kind of pretty much raised herself, had very little supports, and so on. She struggled also all through school. She, with what she knows now, has self-diagnosed and is pretty sure she is and was attention deficit hyperactivity, suffers from attention deficit hyperactivity, and perhaps also has a learning disability in the area of reading. But when I asked Mindy, Jim, Rachel, and even Angel, the situations that you endured and the things that the negative experiences that you had, but you say that it didn't impact your pursuit toward education, more education. They each told me that they had reflected upon those experiences, accepted them, and moved past them, which I thought was pretty impressive. Angel's 46-year-old Hispanic female who dropped out of high school at 16 years of age. She came from a very poor family. She suffered with an excessive overbite, but the family could not afford braces, dental care, health care, and so on. So she was routinely mocked and bullied, and when she was old enough to leave, she just left. She too, it's amazing to me, the the ability to accept those experiences and just keep moving forward. But she became employed as an apprentice to a bookkeeper and an office manager for a clothing store that was family owned and has been in business for over 80 years. She did that at 18 years of age, and she's been there since that time. But the owner recently told her that he will be retiring soon. And when he retires, the clothing store and all of his properties will be sold. So she will be out of a job. She will. So she's gone into she's working toward her real estate license. So that is a new thing for her. In a way, she does have some experience with managing properties owned by her boss. So she will get the licensing that she needs to move into a new career. So for Mindy, Rachel, and Angel, their learning projects are motivated by career advancement, and then for Jim, his motivation is enjoyment in restoring the pickup. So that was interesting. So in preparation for the interviews, I read several of the articles that were made available to us, and also Miriam, the Brockett articles, and also from Knowles, and just compiled my understanding of the best way to conduct the interviews. What I saw consistently was pretty much to have a plan, to have some guidelines set for, where you're going to meet, when you're going to meet, questions you're going to ask, prompts that you will include. A protocol was really important. So I developed questions, and they're really based off of the ones that Dr. Gwynn gave us, because they were really good questions already. I didn't see any reason to reinvent the wheel. I did add one about history and with educational experiences. I thought that was important. But I kept those questions. I met with the three ladies at my office on campus, and then with Jim, I know the family. He has an office at his home, so I went to his home and we met in his office. Across the researchers who spoke about interview process, they recommended that interviewers not meet with interviewees in a public setting because of the distractions that could be there, sounds and different things that can happen that will take away from the focus of the interview. So I tried to make sure that I, had a good place, a quiet place, so that we could focus on each other and really get some good and deep information. So with that, I'll show you the questions that I came up with. I put these into topics. I saw that recommended in one of the articles that I read, that they be placed in, that your questions kind of fall into topics and later into categories and then later into themes. So I tried to go ahead and start that with the layout of my questions. So the first one was, of course, was the history, and then I had the question, and then the follow-up questions, and then the learning projects, the reason for them, preferences for learning, barriers, and success, their definition or how they would describe successful learning. The learning preferences were pretty much the same across the interviewees. Mindy preferred face-to-face structured classroom. That was one thing that was different from the others. However, she was also one who would look for supplemental materials such as YouTube videos, open educational resources, whatever was there that would supplement her understanding. She was like the other three interviewees in that. The only thing different was her preferred seated classroom environment. So then barriers were pretty much the same across all four of the interviewees. Each one talked about time constraints. Each one talked about workload. Each one talked about, just being tired from their job and then trying to pursue this new learning, and then financial barriers. So then, as far as successful learning, that was an interesting question. I liked the answers that I received. Rachel talked about how she considered successful learning when a light bulb type moment, where you didn't know something and boom, all of a sudden you know it, and that is successful learning to her. While Jim talked about a finished product, even if it's just one of the stages in his restoration of the pickup truck, that's successful learning when he's taken time to find resources, to study those resources, whether it's a diagram, a video, talking with someone, taking that information, applying it to the pickup truck, and then it actually working. That's successful learning to him. So I thought the questions were really, really well designed, and I gather a lot of really good information by using these, and putting them into topics helped me to think as I was talking and interviewing about potential themes that could come out of the information that I was given. So here are the themes that did come out of the interviews. History, everyone has a history, and every person has an educational history. And so even though these interviewees said that the events that happened to them in school did not impede or impact their pursuit of formal education, and that they'd come to a place of acceptance through reflection. At some point, I really believe that it could have, and now they're just past it. But I think it's really important to know your history and and to talk about it. One of the articles that I read spoke about how reflecting on your history as an adult learner is somewhat cathartic, kind of just getting it up and getting it out and thinking back on it and then just speaking about it and then letting it go, because sometimes adult learners can get their learning or their desire to learn can become blocked because of something negative that happened in the past. And Dr. Brockett talked about becoming resistant to learning because of a negative experience. So knowing your history, not necessarily that you have to tell everyone your history, but just that your history and you think about it, not to become bitter or, go back and stir up old bad feelings, but really just to get past it. Sometimes it takes that, just thinking about it and processing it. So, reflection and acceptance. And Miriam took some time in their text to talk about, and in fact, cited other researchers and models for reflection, and the importance of adult learners to reflect on their learning and reflect on especially past history, and to accept those things that have happened and to move past them. So I thought that was an important thing, because we often talk about teachers reflecting, but rarely do we talk about our students reflecting. And I think if it's done and done correctly, it's an important part of transformative learning. So that part I really liked. That was something that I felt through my interviews. Each one had been through that, not even formally, just taking themselves through that. So I felt that was really important. Then authentic learning. Each of the interviewees talked about how they were really excited about the learning projects that they were involved in, because what they were learning, they were able to take back to their work, back to their project, and apply. And so it helped to build those connections, and it also helped to build the motivation and enthusiasm for going back for more, because that's can be a problem for adult learners, is that and it was an interesting thing about barriers too. Let me just say this really quickly, and I'll jump back to this. So we talked about barriers, and each one, told about their barriers. And so my question was, so you've had those barriers, and those are the same barriers that you've experienced in the past when you've attempted, because these were not just first time, this is the first time I'm going to try to get a degree. Each of them had, except for Jim, each one had already tried to come into college and stopped out. So what's the difference now? Because the barriers are the same. Barriers are always going to be there. What's the difference now? How are you overcoming the barriers now, same barriers that you had before that caused you to stop out? So the answer was that they have learned more about how to step back, kind of process what's happening, figure out ways to get around the barriers. And then that authentic learning part, this is helping me at work. So why would I stop? I'm getting better at my job. I'm getting better at restoring this vehicle. I'm going to stick with this. This is really real life experience and authentic learning. So I'm going to stay with this. So it helps to push them past those barriers that they're going to have, that we all have, and stay with it. So then accommodations. And one thing I noticed about each of my interviewees is that they all figured out ways to supplement their learning, ways to get around their areas of need. For example, Jim is not a good reader, so he gets diagrams, and Dr. I'll mess her name up, but Dr. N talked about having a graphical representation. So that's Jim's graphical representation. That's what he does. That's an accommodation that he's made for himself. I know I'm not going to be able to process everything that's in written language. So I'm going to look for resources that provide diagrams, graphs, pictures. Okay. So Rachel has a hard time reading. So before she reads to children, she reads the book, looks in a mirror, reads the book. So she's doing that over and over, so that when she goes before the children, she's not going to stumble and make mistakes. So accommodations was another one, self-accommodation. And I know that when we think of accommodations, or when I think of accommodations, I think IEP, individualized education plan. I think of special education. I think of laws that are around special education. But this is a natural kind of just organic thing that happened across these interviewees in their quest for learning. They found accommodations for themselves. So I thought that was an important thing. So tips on effective instruction and strategies with adult learners. One thing I said was to incorporate a reflection assignment. It's something like the best, worst formal educational experience. Whatever it is, so that there's introspection, looking inside, thinking about, what makes me focus, what makes me want to learn, what has happened in my educational experience that has caused me maybe to not want to learn or to get to that place and not push past it. So thinking about that, how can you incorporate a reflection assignment? And then not only just incorporate a reflection assignment, but teach how to reflect and how to accept. I mean, a lot of times I've done this. I have said, reflect on whatever, but then I don't really get what I'm going after. I get things that, well, even in the interview, I found out a lot of information that I really wasn't looking for. Maybe it was important, and I just haven't processed it yet to and applied it to this yet. And maybe in a couple of days, as I kind of continue to mull over all the things that I was told, I may see where some parts that I thought weren't a part of what I was looking for actually may be a piece of the puzzle that fits someplace. But if you teach students how to reflect, provide a particular model. I know Miriam talked about a model for reflection. That's important too. Providing authentic learning experiences. A lot of colleges and universities are now, focusing on experiential learning projects and so on. But even in the courses that you teach, finding ways to make it authentic, having them interview someone. For me, this was a real life assignment where I sat down face to face with a real person and interviewed them, and I can see how it applies to qualitative data collection, and I can make those connections. But just reading about qualitative data collection and knowing all the parts that are supposed to happen, it really is more effective when you actually go through the process. So, and then planning for collaborative learning, I think that's a really important part as well. Mindy talked about, and also Angel talked about how they both enjoyed collaborative projects and so on. And then help learners to accommodate themselves. And if accommodations is a scary word, because I know accommodations for our learners in a college setting must come through disability services, then don't use that word. Use supplement, support, resources, whatever it is that needs to be used, but help them to figure out what it is that they need and then how they can support their own learning. And that was the thing that I was trying to say with the accommodations part. Because I think adult learners sometimes think that they're supposed to know something that others don't know, or it makes them look weak to depend on a YouTube video, or to read multiple sources, or to read a Statistics for Dummies book. It makes them look lesser than, or they shouldn't even be in the program, or they're not smart enough to be there, when all those things are out there as supports and they should be used. So help them locate or make suggestions for supports. And those were my takeaways for this wonderful assignment. And then here are my references. And again, I just learned a lot through this process. And I probably left out a good bit, but it's in the paper, hopefully, that will help to bring this all together. So thank you, and I look forward to what is next.